Hello everyone, and welcome to another Splitgate video. I am Jesse Griffin, your host for the video. I am the Live Ops Product Coordinator here at 1047 Games, and we are doing our first of hopefully many segments of Coffee with a Dev. We take a developer and we throw out a survey and we say, hey, I want to talk with who our current guest is, Ben Rockland, or Finest Ben, as you know him in the community. He's one of our engineers. He's our senior gameplay engineer, actually. People, who are interested in talking with Ben filled it out, and we have five special guests here with us today. Ben, if you want to go ahead and start us off with just, your story, the steps you took to get to engineer, college degree, background there, and that should probably be enough to go ahead and kick off some questions.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks for the intro, Jesse. Buckle up, I suppose. It's quite the journey that led me here, but I'm excited to be able to share it. So, I suppose it all started when I began attending university at Stanford for computer science. I actually had no, initial thoughts about going into the game industry, believe it or not. My undergrad was systems development, so stuff like very low-level programming, compilers, operating systems, cybersecurity, that kind of thing. And then I thought AI seemed like an interesting field, so I started doing a master's degree in that. About half a year before I was slated to finish that, though, that's when the COVID pandemic hit. So our entire course catalog at Stanford just got completely thrown out the window, I didn't really know how I was going to graduate, and my two options for an elective to graduate were Intro to Unreal Engine and Advanced Operating Systems. So I'm sure you can guess which one I found a little bit more interesting. I did end up taking that Intro Game Development. Even told my mom, funnily enough, when I signed up, I was like, yeah, this probably won't lead anywhere, but, it sounds like a fun time. Turns out, by a stroke of luck, Cardinal Soldier and Meme Lord, or Ian and Nick, as I better knew them, they were the TAs for the course, actually. So, I just sort of worked hard in there, stood out to them, and before I knew it, I had a job offer to come here. And, of course, it was in the middle of the pandemic, so I was like, this is totally different than what I was studying for, but sounds fun, and now's the time to be taking risks. So, I joined up there, and I've been having a blast ever since, working as a gameplay engineer here at 1047. Worn a lot of different hats over the years, I would say. I've been here since Splitgate 1, so it's been quite the ride.
Yeah, and now you're our senior gameplay engineer, so that is very exciting. Very new title, and very well deserved.
Thank you. Yeah.
Of course, dude. Of course. We have five guests with us today. Skyfire, Apologization, Minishvi, Nocturne, and Eventide. I think probably the floor is open at this point if anyone has any questions in regards to Ben, what he's working on, his background in particular classes, anything like that. The floor is yours, everyone.
What do you wish that you studied harder on while you were in college, specifically when you were working on your game development section?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And this may come as a bit of a surprise to you, but I would say linear algebra of all things. There's actually a surprising amount of math that goes into gameplay roles, especially when you're working on a game with portals, as you might imagine. There's just a ton of crazy matrix transforms you're dealing with, projecting the world onto different surfaces, so you can see that through other portals. And I really feel like if I had maybe a better foundation there, a lot of those tasks would probably come more naturally to me. And obviously, if you're hoping to be an engineer, you need to learn to code. The bigger thing is just getting into sort of that problem-solving mindset, is how I might put it. And really, that just comes with practice and experience. So classes are great, I love them. But in my experience, the best teacher, funnily enough, is experience, I suppose. So just getting your hands on an engine, Unity, Unreal, Godot, whatever, just trying out some personal projects, whatever interests you. I think that's easily the number one thing you could do if you're aiming to become a game developer professionally.
I guess as a follow-up question then, would events like Game Jam be a good opportunity to kind of hone that experience?
Absolutely. I obviously, given my story, I didn't have the opportunity to do so myself. I was right out of my intro class and immediately in this role. But if you have that bandwidth, I would say that's invaluable.
I want to know your language roadmap for just programming in general.
Totally. Yeah, great question. I would say programming languages, the more experience I've gotten, I'd say the more I've come to view it as a means to an end rather than the end itself, if that makes sense, like learning the language. So, each language obviously has its own strengths and weaknesses, but broadly speaking, languages have concepts, I would say, that are broadly transferable. The frameworks that you use them in are more what matters outside of some of the smaller details of each, I'd say. I actually tried learning Java very early on, high school freshman year, and I swore off coding forever. When my friends were trying to teach it to me, I was like, oh my gosh, this doesn't make sense. What the hell is system? What is out? What is print line? Why don't you guys have the answers? Like, this is horrible. Why would you do this? And so I actually initially intended to never code again. And then I kind of got duped into it a little bit, you might say. I was taking algebra that year. And my teacher for the course, I remember Mr. Scott, he was teaching us to make the quadratic formula on our TI calculators. You know, it was kind of fun. And after I did, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then he said the magic words. He's like, if you code a formula, you can use it on the exam. And so at that point, I was like, oh, say less, man, you know, I'm in. So I started teaching myself TI Basic really quick. At that point, you know, I was sort of hooked. So I decided to take a elective the next year on learning to make iPhone apps, actually in Objective-C, which nowadays, you know, you mostly use Swift, but back then it was Objective-C. Had some fun with that, and then I decided to finally buckle up and take AP Comp Sci with Java. And then from there, it was just sort of, you know, learning at my own pace. I took some internships and jobs between high school and college, you know, in IT. Taught myself Python at that point, and then from there just learned a bunch of other stuff, you know, JavaScript, TypeScript, C, C++, you know, all these things just sort of over time. Rust, Ruby, I suppose, too. And once you start understanding and mastering the concepts in one, I would say, it really makes it a lot easier to learn a new one. It becomes less, how do I code? What's the process behind coding? And more, hey, what's the syntax for a for loop in this? You know, what's the proper way to assign variables? How do branches work and what have you?
What do you think is the most important skill or like ability to becoming or being a game engineer? I understand that like maths and like coding, stuff like that, obviously, but like, is there anything that you were like taken aback, like, oh, I wouldn't expect that I need to know something like this?
I think just having good architectural skills, as it were, so like being able to plan out approaches to problems that like might not be the fastest solution, but are certainly creative and clean, is absolutely the most key thing. Like, I think what makes gameplay development so different from maybe a lot of other disciplines, at least in my experience, you know, you're dealing with, you know, you have to do stuff every single frame. Like, every single frame matters in terms of efficiency, and you have all sorts of just interwoven systems on a very large scale project, where most of these engineers, you know, they're working on these different systems, don't necessarily understand the other systems that they're working with, you know, or interacting with. It's sort of black box style. So you need to be doing stuff in a very clean and efficient way, such that, you know, the game runs smoothly, it performs well, and then on top of all that, you know, you can keep building on top of it. I'm sure you heard that Splitgate 1, you know, stemmed from a college project. And back then, like, to give people an idea, I don't think they really understand necessarily how hard it was to develop in Splitgate 1. Doing something like changing a mode from single round to multi-round is like, would have been a week endeavor back then with how we did the game modes. And, you know, at the time when, you know, the founders were starting out, it made sense the way they were doing it. But scope creep is definitely a thing where, you know, people want more and more features, more and more new things. And that ultimately manifests oftentimes in messy code if you don't have the experience and background to make those good architectural decisions. Thankfully, I'm happy to say that changing a game mode to be round-based nowadays is like a 1 minute change where I just go into a mode and change a number to something else. But it definitely was not always that way with Splitgate 1, so I'm grateful for the change.
Being able to like understand, oh, I need to code it this way so that I can add another game mode later on to this. Does that just come with time, or was there like some philosophy that you had?
I would say time, experience, and research as well. When Epic released Unreal Engine 5, they released a project. I always butcher the name. I forget whether it's Lyra or Lyra. I'm sure someone, you know, that's watching this later is screaming at me, you know, for saying it wrong. They did a lot of things very differently than most game developers tended to do them in Unreal Engine 4 on their own projects. So looking at sort of novel ways of doing things and drawing inspiration from that and, you know, tweaking it to fit your own ends, I think is also a big part of it. Really just seeing, you know, like how other developers do things, because everyone's got their own unique way of thinking, right? I think, and I mean this honestly, I think pretty much every engineer on our team brings something unique to the table. And it's pretty often where, I'll just be chilling in a virtual cubicle, we're a virtual company. I'll be in a virtual cubicle and be struggling on just how to implement this one feature. And, my buddy like DK or Steve or whatever will hop in. I'll be like, oh man, I have no idea how to do this. I'm really struggling. They're like, oh, have you just tried thinking about it this way? And oftentimes I hadn't, and it's very clean. And then, I'll do the same for them. So really just collaborating, finding people to talk to. There's fantastic communities online as well that I'll endorse. Unreal Slackers is a really useful Discord community, and the Unreal forums are also fantastic for getting help. Just using all the resources you have at your disposal on top of those other things, I think, is really key.
Did you have any major roadblocks on your journey to where you are now?
Oh man, definitely quite a few roadblocks, but I think the best journeys are full of those. So for me, I would say a big part of it was obviously, as I mentioned before, not being formally trained in game development. I had a lot of stuff to pick up when I got here. It's a very unique style coding, I would say. I joined maybe 3 months, I want to say, before Splitgate 1 console launch, and I'm not sure if any of you were there for the initial console launch, but if you were, you surely remember how insane the servers were, when that happened. We had insane, like, multi-hour long queues. So most of the team, honestly, at that point in time, they were really just sort of focused on fixing that, getting the servers up and running. And there I am, someone that barely understands Unreal Engine to begin with, just desperately trying to teach myself, hey, like, what's a T array? What's a U property? What's a U function? How do I use all of these things? But I think to an extent also having to teach myself that stuff and having that additional pressure really motivated me to sort of start picking up the engine at a faster pace. So, all that being said, I'm grateful for the experience, and I feel like I'm stronger today because of it.
I don't know if you can answer this, but were there any features that you guys made or were partway through making that didn't make it to Splitgate, either 1 or 2?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot of features that sort of have promise, but then you try them out and they end up just not working quite as well as you would think. For those of you that don't know, I'm sort of, my main role, I suppose I haven't even talked about this, I'm sort of like the game mode guy in a lot of ways. So I work on game modes, mostly, primarily Arena. So with the development of Splitgate 2, a lot of people don't realize Hot Zone is like the 4th iteration of this mode. It used to actually be a mode called Tug of War, where rather than it being like based off of how many hills you capture, it would be like a chain of hills, and you would have to like capture them slowly and sequentially until eventually you capture the hill in the other team's base. And you can kind of see that now with Hot Zone, where you capture the middle hill, the next hill ends up in your opponent's base, but that's sort of the last vestige of it. And there have been so many other things that have changed too, like we experimented having multiple hills active at once, so you'd have to control both of them and tick it up, and just all sorts of changes like that, And then very early on, this was probably the biggest headache I ever had developing a game mode. We made something called Portal Partners. So this was back in I want to say early 2023, right when we had started the game, and we were working on a mode where each person controlled one portal in a portal pair. But it would literally be like you and your partner have to each control, one of you gets the yellow portal, one of you gets the purple, and then, you have to portal for each other. It was a fun concept, but first of all, we didn't have any UI in the game, so you had no way of knowing whether or not your partner had actually placed their portal. But it was insanely difficult to make too, because, portals, as you might imagine, we've always sort of assumed on the gameplay side, oh, you have 2 portals, you place them, you go through them. All of a sudden having to worry about a teammate doing that and compensate for, how you can't see through teammate portals, changing that so you can see through both yours and that teammates, but nobody else's, and all sorts of stuff like that. So we just ended up, cutting it for now. I mean, could it come back in the future? Who knows? Maybe. But I think it'd play a lot better now, frankly, that we actually have indicators showing you where portals are. But yeah, that was just a crazy mode that didn't make it out, that I don't think anyone really heard about. Man, it was probably like a month of work on my end. So, sometimes you just try things and they don't quite pan out.
How do you personally handle negative feedback?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and something I had to learn to do very early in my career, I'd say. My first big project, if you played Splitgate 1, you might remember Contamination, the zombies mode. And it was my first big project that I had the opportunity to work on and sort of spearhead. And I'd say it went okay. You know, we hit broadly what we were hoping to do, but like the maps just weren't suited for it. A lot of the balancing decisions I made, frankly, were pretty atrocious. You know, I would definitely do things differently if I were to go back there. And, you know, the community definitely let us know that. And so, I mean, there's a few things I learned. The first is just like, you can't get too necessarily attached and defensive of your features. You have to take everything with an open mind, you know? You're obviously making the decisions you can with the information you have and your own thoughts, but at the end of the day, things are going to play very, very differently in a live setting with thousands of people trying something out than they will with, you know, just a handful of developers at a company testing stuff. So keeping an open mind to that feedback, I'd say, is key. The other thing, too, that I think a lot of people miss is I think the worst thing is apathy, frankly, more so than negative feedback. Because negative feedback, to me at least, shows that people care, you know? And they have an investment in the game and they want it to be good. And so I think approaching feedback from that perspective in good faith, thinking, okay, they're using strong language perhaps, you know, they're saying things I might not agree with, but, you know, they have legitimate opinions and they want the game to be in its best possible state from their perspective. So taking the feedback from that point of view, I think, is absolutely the key to being able to then build on it and build something even better than you already had. Because at the end of the day, you know, you're nothing without your player base. And so it's important to be taking their opinions into perspective and using it to improve as much as you can.
Also on that note, maybe how do you tackle bug reports and how to fix them?
Oh boy, that's an interesting question because I've gotten some very interesting bug reports over the years, is all I'll say. I'd say the first thing is honestly just making the problem happen yourself, you know, finding a way where you can consistently do it over and over again. And then past that, you know, it's just a matter of what the bug is and how it's manifesting that determines how you deal with it from there. Like, logging is super useful. Putting breakpoints and stuff that you think might be suspect is super useful. And then just using the information you gather from there, playing things by ear, and, you know, adapting and trying out different fixes to see if that solves the problem, I would say is absolutely it.
What is the greatest moment for you personally while working in the games industry?
Being able to teabag my boss in game on the first day was pretty chill. Most companies would not be super stoked with that. But also, I would say, for me, what really has shined are sort of the late night jam sessions. There have definitely been quite a few times where, like, it'll just be a bunch of the engineers, you know, my main buddies, just in a cubicle until like 12 or 1 in the morning, crunching on some stuff or just building stuff that we think is pretty cool and sort of riffing off of each other and, you know, seeing what we can make. Like, a lot of people don't realize how a lot of cool ideas come from just sort of improv in a sense. I think a good example of that is Slide in Splitgate 2. Splitgate 2, I don't want to sound like a shill, but I think it has my favorite sliding in any game I've ever played. And it literally came about just because of one of our engineers, Steve, who joined around when I did. He just decided to do it for fun, you know, on the weekend or whatever, and came out and he was like, yo, I got this new slide. You guys want to try it? And this was way back when we were first even beginning to work on Splitgate 2. And I think it's cool that such an amazing and fluid movement ability just came from one guy sort of sending it. And, you know, we've all sort of had those moments, and sometimes it's together, sometimes it's alone, but sort of just having everything click while you're experimenting, being like, wow, this is actually so amazing. I think those are moments to die for.
All right, well, that is pretty much going to wrap us up. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this first segment of Coffee with a Dev. Discord is definitely the best way to get a bit more involved in the community, which of course will be linked in the video down below. And of course, you know, to our guests, thank you for filling out the survey. Thank you for the time you took this morning. And of course, Ben, thank you.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Jesse, for hosting. And it was very nice meeting all of you. You had fantastic questions, so thank you.
Absolutely. Cool. Thank you, everyone.